So we have about 15 minutes or so for questions. So, would anybody... Yes, please would you just say your name and find a question to Elizabeth?
Sure. My name is Brooke. I have a question. Just in the absence, I guess, of any statutory tort, I'm interested in the use that's being made of the complaints provision. Sorry, shall I repeat that? I'm interested in the use that's being made of the provisions for complaints under the two statutes that you mentioned.
They're certainly utilised. A lot of it, though, depends upon people's knowledge that those complaints exist, and also referral to them. PIPA covers generally the New South Wales public sector, so councils, state government agencies and universities. But when people might want to make a complaint about a suspected breach of their privacy, they may not necessarily be referred to those pieces of legislation, the complaint mechanisms that they provide, because privacy complaints can be dealt with through the general complaints handling mechanisms of those entities. And I have no measures upon how much they are used and relative to the privacy legislation complaint handling mechanisms. Our figures, though, show a very steady increase over 5 years. In fact, I think it's almost doubled since 2012/13. Underneath the health privacy legislation, the private sector that is providing health services is covered, and then organisations of a certain size that hold health information is also covered. And there is dual coverage there with the Federal Privacy Act. And so we just make sure that they are aware of both options if they want to make a complaint.
Next question. Oh, yes. Let's stop waiting. Thank you.
Shmasini, Consul General, Papua New Guinea. Okay, it's a good question. Let me just ask, what happens to privacy in terms of single mothers who want to have abortion? What is your view?
I don't see that that would be any different to anyone seeking a health service, that they have the right for their privacy to be protected in terms of the principles that are in both the general PIPA Act and also the Health Privacy Legislation Act. And they cover basically the whole information cycle of collection of information, how it's collected, how it's used, how it's stored and how it's disposed of. There are under the health legislation some additional principles which concern movement of data outside of New South Wales. But irrespective of what service you are seeking, you have the right to privacy in terms of the provisions of that piece of legislation. I should just also mention underneath the health privacy legislation, there are certain additional provisions. I touched upon one of them, and that's the movement of information outside of New South Wales, but it also does allow for anonymity and pseudonymity, or particularly anonymity. And I think that's in some cases when people are seeking health services, it's a very important principle, because one of the last things we want is for people not to seek health services for fear of stigma or retribution in some form.
Thank you. Gentleman, I think over here. Yes. So.
My name is Zia Ahmed from Australasian Muslim Times. Filling up the census for an extended family household of 13 adults and kids was a nightmare. I just want to ask you that the census actually required this very detailed data in terms of relationships with parents and children and work addresses and salaries and all those things. I'm happy to, it took me some time to provide all that, but who can actually access it, and can it be used in some sort of a negative way for people? I'm just, when I was filling up, I was really concerned about it.
Look, your concerns mirror many of the calls which we received and also what was reported in the media, and I don't think that was made very clear as to how long the information would be held, who would have access to it, and under what conditions it would be used. I believe that whenever, government asks you for information, you have the absolute right to say, why is this required? What use will it be put to? And you have the right to understand those issues. The ABS, in discussions I had with them, and they tended to be more a notification of what they were planning to do rather than, I wouldn't classify their discussions as a consultation. Their legislation does contain provisions that make it very clear that it's to be used for these purposes, and I unfortunately am not a sufficient expert to expand upon that in detail, and I would have to basically refer you to the ABS. But those concerns are very legitimate because we know from history as we look back that when citizens provide information for very sound public policy purposes, it is possible, it's not inevitable, but it is possible that that information could be used at some point in a manner that they weren't anticipating or didn't expect. And I'm not saying that would be the case here at all, but that was what people, when they were ringing us, were sort of saying, well, what certainty do I have? How? And it was, a very difficult issue to address because it really isn't in our jurisdiction. It's a federal matter for a start, but it's also covered by the ABS legislation. The risks that I saw, and I did, I was very concerned about, some of the risks, sufficiently concerned that I did make some public statements about that. And they went to the risk management of this, because it's not just about the questions being asked. It's about how much information is collected and how it is stored, and was the actual security of that information, going to be adequate? And they're the things that I think we all need to be conscious of, whether it's for the ABS census or wherever else we're providing information, whether it's on a retail loyalty card, because centralised databases of information, of names, addresses, financial details, relationships, do provide what's called in my area, a honeypot, which people like to hack, whether it's for mischievous reasons, which aren't particularly criminal in nature, through to criminal intent for inappropriate purposes. So I do also want to stress, though, that I see the ABS census having a very important and critical public policy purpose. We use it in ways which actually does inform policy decisions, planning decisions, allocation of money across Australia. And so it's important it gets the information that's provided to it is accurate, because if it's not, then you sort of, that's saying, poor information in, poor decisions out. And that were the sort of things that I was discussing with the Commonwealth statistician, is that, the matters which people are raising, they require communication direct to those points so that A, people do fill it in, and they fill it in completely and accurately, but that their privacy is protected. Because my point is if you don't have the trust of people who are providing you with information, you lose that goodwill, but also too, the accuracy or completeness of information. And that's not just sort of a personal or a note from Privacy Commission experience, but also from the research. And the Office of the Australian Information Commission has done some research which shows that. If people don't trust you, they don't give you information, they walk away.
Thank you. We wondered how long it would be until we got a question on the ABS.
We did indeed.
Questions. My colleague from Western Sydney University School, Dr. Tell.
I'm Tila Rajaratnam. I'm from the School of Law, Western Sydney University. I'm looking at the international landscape for privacy law. Recently, the General Data Protection Regulation was passed by the EU. It has got a lot of implications on European Union member states. So I'm looking at the implication on Australian privacy law, because if you're looking at the current framework, there's lack of adequacy in terms of privacy standards. So as well as I had the occasion to attend a conference in Cambridge where the Privacy Commissioner from the European Union attended. And there seemed to be a lot of uncertainty about the implications on Britain due to the Brexit. What is the implication in terms of Australia? Thank you.
Thank you for that questions, and I will put up front my awareness that I don't necessarily have all the detail or adequately to respond to that, but I will get back to you. It is very uncertain, and I also understand too there's been a lot of discussion about how that's proceeding and the degree to which it will be both accepted and also implemented. In terms of Australia, the Federal Privacy Commission is probably best placed to take responsibility for responding to that, but as I said, I will get back to you. There's some very eminent Australians in privacy law who are working in that space, and I'd be very happy to make contact.
Because that's my research area.
All right, perhaps we could exchange cards at the end.
I was hoping that to happen. So thanks, Tilla. This gentleman.
Stephen Blanks, Councillor Civil Liberties, an excellent address. Thank you, Dr. Coombs. You've highlighted that the law reform commissions are all of one mind about recommending a private remedy for serious invasion of privacy. Remarkably, in New South Wales, the politicians across the political spectrum who were on that committee came to a unanimous view that there should be such protection. Clearly the media is the major opponent, even after taking into account protection of press freedom. How do we overcome the media opposition to this? Why are the politicians who really are in power subservient to the media on this, or if am I misunderstanding where the opposition is coming from?
Stephen, thank you for that question. So it's good to end on a strong question. I hope to get an equally strong response. I think probably the best response is actually in the words of the Honourable Michael Kirby, who addressed as part of Privacy Awareness Month in May of this year, the media's influence upon this particular issue. He didn't address, though, the particular point that you're raising of how. And I think that we have to do a lot more work to actually demonstrate how that balance can be achieved. I mean, I think that's, as I stand here trying to answer that question in a sensible manner, there has to be an actual explanation which is sound to show how it would work in practice. And I know that quite a number of those law reform commissions, particularly at the federal level, tried to spell that out in terms of principles of what would be serious, or thresholds, sorry, and how that would work. It's not an easy response, but it's one I think that is worthwhile trying to explore, because if that is the major barrier, it is one where we should actually then be trying to encourage exploration of that. I think that's really the best response I can give at this stage.
As we have about 30 seconds left, and I'm facilitating, I get to ask the last question, which is, Elizabeth, I'm sure we were discussing this a little bit over lunch. The Office of the Privacy Commission is not the most high profile of various government departments. How would you like to see that raising awareness of profile so that people know where to come? And as the gentleman said about the ABS, confusion over jurisdiction in law, that's one of the most common, our constitution is complex, where do I go, etc. So a mixture between how do you raise that profile and also help people to get to the right place.
Thank you. And look, this is something which goes to my philosophy that privacy is not just my business, it's the business of us all. So I ask you all to be conscious of privacy. We have missed my contact details and of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner are there. And so I always try to get those out as much as I possibly can, because citizens do have the right to take up their rights in this space, and we need to have that out there. But I need to recognise that the art of being a regulator is to encourage others to see the value in taking privacy seriously, but also communicating people's rights. And actually part of that is to let people know that we exist and that we can assist them. And also too, I hope to keep dialogue going with yourselves in whatever areas that there might be.
Thank you very much.